Hi everyone. I hope you're doing well. I really miss having you in class. I'm sitting up here at the school recording this and missing all of you here, so hope you're all doing well. I wanted to share this video with you. We're going to be talking about um, some some information that we need to know from section 2 in our textbook, and then I'm going to add some things from Bleeding Kansas to this from other sources. Since it's our own state, we want to talk a little bit about this as it's leading up to the start of the Civil War. So thank you for all your wonderful presentations that I've already seen about the Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Law, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So just to hit on that real quick as it leads into Bleeding Kansas. So we know as these two regions are made into territories and set aside to use popular sovereignty to decide these issues, they're going to be a focus of conflict leading up to the Civil War, and that repeal on the ban of slavery north of the 3630 line that had come from the Missouri Compromise was definitely a problem to people, especially in the North, as they start getting their mind around the concept that slavery has the possibility of going west to these new regions. So we see when the Kansas territory, where you can see it extends all the way out here to Colorado and had mountains in it at one time. Too bad we gave that up. But that land in the Kansas territory being next to Missouri, many thought it might end up being a slave territory as a neighboring state to Missouri, and that the Nebraska territory would go for a free territory being bordered with Iowa. But people are not willing to give up on Kansas yet and decide to fight it out, and that's where we'll talk about Bleeding Kansas here in a few minutes. Part of the lasting effects that comes out of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, as you pointed out, was the rise of the Republican Party. So the Whigs and the Democrats had been the major parties prior to this time, but the Whig Party is killed off by the Kansas-Nebraska Act. It was so divisive. And so the Know-Nothings try to come in their place. They were more formally called the American Party, but the Know-Nothings is what they were known as more. They are a party of anti-immigration, anti-Catholic, which didn't make them the most popular, as a lot of the northern people had many immigrants coming in. And so when they cannot make the cut, the Republicans start rising through that. The Republicans are the anti-slavery party. We'll talk about how that covers a wide range of viewpoints. They're also pro-business and very nationalistic, and so that made them very popular in the North, but non-existent in the South. So when Abraham Lincoln is elected, we'll talk about how he really is the president of the North, because he didn't get a lot of, if any, much Southern support for his election, and reads into that virtual civil war in Kansas. And so let's go ahead and talk about that. These four territories opening up here with the possibility of slavery going west was a major focus of elections and debate within Congress, but it all kind of comes down to the Kansas territory. So when that territory is open, we see a lot of people rushing here, both pro-slavery and anti-slavery, wanting to be part of this decision. So first, looking at pro-slavery, so many of them came across the border from Missouri to come into the territory, hoping to keep it from becoming a free territory, then a free state. Their main settlements were in Atchison and Leavenworth, just across the river from Missouri, and so they had established those places. Now, their viewpoint of why Kansas should have been a slave territory, then state, was that there was a lot of economic opportunities in Kansas. We know there's great agricultural land here, and they saw that if they could use that as a slave state, that would be very beneficial to them. Missouri and the other slave states were also concerned about how their way of life was in jeopardy. We see that the number of free states is growing quickly compared to the slave states. There's definitely a big disparity in Congress, both in the Senate and the House of Representatives, and so they're trying to hold on to everything that they can. And farmers are also worried about that there's a large number of slaves on the Kansas-Missouri border, that if Kansas became a free state, that it would give them easier access to escape, and that it could influence the slaveholders on that border quite a bit. On the other side, we have the anti-slavery. This is two groups, the abolitionists, those who believe that slavery is immoral and wanted to end right away, and the free staters who don't want to see slavery going any further west into those four territories that we looked at. So they organized specifically Lawrence and Topeka. Now, part of their viewpoint is first moral, that it's morally wrong, that slavery is an abomination. Others saw that slaveholders had an unfair economic advantage and were concerned about, because the slaves are not paid a wage, that it was less costly for slave owners, and many people had a problem with that. There's also a fear that those four territories we looked at is a big chunk of land, and that if slavery would to go into those territories, there could be a national spread to make it legal everywhere. So a lot of people wanted to stop that from happening. Some of those groups were examples of like the New England Immigrant Aid Company, who organized people to come to Kansas to fight slavery. So they often offered, helped pay for train tickets, transportation to get people to Kansas. And then they would assist you in finding land, set up a home, set up businesses in these anti-slavery strongholds like Lawrence, Topeka. Manhattan was another one that a lot of people settled in trying to fight slavery. Part of their efforts were helped by what was nicknamed the Beecher's Bibles. Henry Ward Beecher, an abolitionist, the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, sent sharp rifles to help the anti-slavery settlement. They disguised them as books so they wouldn't be detected. And often these boxes of books and Bibles were sent to a church, and so people didn't question it as much. This is the Beecher Bible and Rifle Church, where many of these shipments were sent to and then dispersed out to anti-slavery settlers. Now, outside of the abolition and free staters that we talked about earlier, we also have a few other groups here. So the Border Ruffians were the Missourians who would cross over the border to illegally vote on the slavery issues and attack anti-slavery settlements. Then we have on the other side the Jayhawkers, that were the Kansans who were making raids into Missouri. So prior to the Civil War, these two groups were fighting it out in Kansas as part of the Bleeding Kansas era. Now, after the war started, another group emerges, the Bushwhackers, who were often considered like a citizen army, not part of the formal army, but they were making raids into Kansas. So a lot of different groups, no matter what side you were on, could be called the Bushwhackers, but the Kansans usually kept with the name the Jayhawkers from before the war. So one infamous attack here in the Bleeding Kansas era was the sack on Lawrence. This was May 21st, 1856, when 800 pro-slavery border ruffians came into Lawrence early in the morning, attacked, looted, burned the town, targeting specifically the newspapers first as a way of communication that they're trying to keep from not being available to people. And because the citizens of Lawrence did not fight back, which is what the border ruffians wanted them to do, very few lives were lost. One life was lost when a building collapsed onto a pro-slavery border ruffian, but very few people within the town there was injuries, but very few deaths. Now, in this Bleeding Kansas era, there's also the infamous John Brown. And we'll talk a little bit more about him in an activity later this week. He is very well known for his fight for freedom and equality for all men, and especially the way he would use violence to try to end slavery. So he is involved in several battles, the Potawatomi Massacre, where he and his sons ruthlessly killed pro-slavery people. They would attack farms and help to free slaves as they made their way to Canada. He's also very well known for his raid on Harper's Ferry to get weapons to try to arm the slaves. He had called on slaves to come and help him take over the arsenal. He was not successful in that, was captured, put on trial, and hung for his actions. Now, Kansas is also going to be in this effort moving towards statehood. So 4 different constitutions are offered during this time, trying to get Kansas to become a state. The first was the Topeka Constitution. It's first rejected in Congress. Congress had opened up voting rights to white males and civilized male Indians. The Lecompton Constitution will be offered soon after that. It was divided into 2 parts that made it very confusing. And basically, no matter how you voted, you were voting to approve slavery. So Congress throws that one out. Leavenworth came about the same time. It would have offered all men the right to vote, white, black, and Native American, but did not get the support it needed until they put forth the Why Not Constitution, calling for no slavery. And after the southern states secede from the Union, Kansas is finally able to get statehood on January 29th, 1861. Now, during this time, there's also a Supreme Court case that was heard for Dred Scott, who was suing for his freedom on the grounds that he had spent time on free soil. And this case is tried in St. Louis, Missouri. And as the ruling came down, Dred Scott was a slave, so he's not a citizen, and so he had no right to sue in federal court. They also ruled that slaves are private property, so they can be taken to any territory and legally held there using the Fifth Amendment right that there's a right for people not to be deprived of their property without due process of law. And so they were arguing that no matter where his owner went, he could be held in slavery. And finally, there was the Missouri Compromise. They said it was unconstitutional from the start. Congress doesn't have the power to ban slavery in the territories, even if those territories want to be on free soil. So there's a lot of judgments that came in this case. This case really fired up the abolitionists to fight against slavery even more with this court case. This is a statue outside the old courthouse in St. Louis, Missouri, where the case was tried. This is Dred Scott and his wife Harriet immortalized here with this statue. So I just want to offer a few reminders as we finish up this section. Please reach out if you have any questions. Make sure on Teams that you are regularly checking for announcements, posts, to make sure that you're replying to everything that you need to be seeing. And our class channel throughout the week, not just at the beginning, please. And also make sure you're looking for your assignments in our weekly folder on the general page. In the files is where I'm putting all the class resources. If you can't find anything, reach out again. Glad to help. Thank you for your hard work this past week, and I really think you're doing a great job. But miss you all again, and hope it's a great one, and hope to talk to you soon.